What's the difference between a bookkeeper in New York's Garment District and a Supreme Court justice? One generation. Hey everyone, I am back again today with another video. Today we're going to be continuing our Badass Women series, and as you can see, I have a whole bunch of my female pop characters right here, as well as Cassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. She's just kind of hanging out with my black cat and a pumpkin. So one of the reasons I really wanted to do this video was because, I'm not even sure if a lot of people who aren't American really know who Ruth Bader Ginsburg was. But, even beyond that, she was such a badass, and she deserves to be a part of this series. She wasn't just an amazing woman for liberals, but even if you didn't like her, she did so much for all American women. So, yeah, that's why she's here. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date every time I do upload a new video. And go ahead and leave a comment down below either how Ruth gave you an inspiration or how she impacted your life in some way. Let's go ahead and jump into today's video. Joan Ruth Ginsburg was born March 15, 1933, in a low-income, working-class neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. She was the second daughter of Nathan and Celia Bader. And during the height of the Depression, her dad worked as a furrier, which is someone who dealt with fur, and her mom worked as a bookkeeper in the Garment District. Unfortunately, tragedy struck the family in May of 1934 when her older sister Marilyn contracted meningitis and passed away at the age of 6. Celia came from an Austrian immigrant family, and she loved school. She was the kind of person who had her nose stuck in a book everywhere she went. She did so well in school, and she even graduated high school at the age of 15. But that was back during the time when women weren't really expected to go to college and further their education. So rather than being able to pursue her own dreams, she had to go ahead and start working to be able to help fund her brother to go to Columbia. This sacrifice is what really inspired Ruth to go as far as she could in her career. When Ruth was in kindergarten, there was another girl named Joan. So to be able to help the teachers differentiate the two, she started going by her middle name. And the Bader family was a very observant Jewish family, and Ruth grew up doing Jewish childhood traditions. She went to James Madison High School, and she did super well there. She was valedictorian, and she got a full ride to Cornell University. Unfortunately, tragedy again struck the Bader family, and her mother passed away the day before her high school graduation. During her first semester at Cornell, Ruth was set up on a blind date with a man named Marty Ginsburg. At first, he thought Ruth was really, really cute. But then once he actually started talking to her, he realized, man, this girl is really, really smart. And Ruth even said that Marty was the first person she dated that actually cared at all that she was smart. She ended up being the valedictorian of her class at Cornell as well, and 9 days after their graduation, her and Marty got married. Marty joined the Army in 1955, and the two of them moved to Fort Stills, Oklahoma. While they were here, Ruth took the civil service exam, and she qualified to be a claims adjuster. But at this point, she was already 3 months pregnant with their daughter, Jane. And when she told her employers about it, they cut her pay, they cut her rank, and they cut her title. Just because she was pregnant. Ruth started thinking about how she wanted to go to law school, but she was conflicted on how she would be able to manage being a full-time mom and go to law school and deal with all that overloaded coursework. But her dad actually gave her some good advice. Ruth, if you don't want to start law school, you have a good reason to resist the undertaking. No one will think less of you if you make that choice. But if you really want to study law, you will stop worrying and find a way to manage child and school. When Marty finished his service, the two of them decided to move to Massachusetts to attend Harvard Law. Now, there were about 500 people in the graduating class, but only 9 of them were women. And to say there was a lot of toxic masculinity going on would be an understatement. Like, this was not an ideal situation for any woman to be in. Like, the dean of the school at the time was this guy named Erwin Griswold, and he invited all the women to come over and have dinner one night. After they were done eating, he had them all go around the table and justify why they got the enrollment and it shouldn't have gone to a man instead. Later, when it came out that he said this, he laughed it off and said, "Oh no, we were just joking." We all know he wasn't joking. These sexist attacks didn't deter Ruth from her education. And, you know what, she even became the first woman on the Harvard Law Review Board. In 1956, Marty got diagnosed with testicular cancer. He had to undergo chemotherapy and extensive rehabilitation. So now, not only was Ruth having to be a full-time law student and a full-time mommy, but she was also having to be a full-time caretaker to her husband. Luckily, Marty was able to beat cancer, and he graduated from Harvard and accepted a position in New York City. Obviously, Ruth wanted to be with her husband, and so she went ahead and transferred her last year from Harvard to Columbia. She graduated at the top of her class of Columbia in 1959, but despite having such a distinguished academic record, she was having the hardest time finding a job. At this point in time, there were very few women in the law profession, and only 2 women had ever been made into a federal judge. One of her professors at Columbia finally had enough and said he wasn't going to write any more recommendations until someone gave her a job. Finally, that worked, and she got a job working with Edmund Palmieri, who was a U.S. district judge, and she worked as a law clerk for him until 1961. In 1963, she was given the opportunity to be a professor at Rutgers Law School. And again, she faced a lot of gender discrimination here. Like, when she was getting hired, the dean actually asked her to take a reduced salary because, 1, she was a woman, and 2, because Marty made a lot of money, so clearly she didn't need to make a bunch of money. Okay. Anyway, after that, she decided to join an equal pay campaign, and this sparked a lifelong career of fighting for gender equality. In 1965, she became pregnant with their second son, James. But given what happened to her in Oklahoma, she was really wary about telling anyone that she was pregnant. So she just wore a whole bunch of baggy clothes and everything and hid her pregnancy for as long as she could. But I mean, she got tenure in 1969, so. Ruth and Marty never let gender roles define their relationship. Very early on in their marriage, Marty realized that Ruth could not cook to save her life. So out of necessity, he learned how to cook. And that's not to say that he did all the cooking, but, if he was busy trying to further his career, she would take over the household responsibilities. But when Ruth was pursuing her career, Marty would take over. So it was a very equal marriage. And then there's one point that their son recalls in an interview that he got in trouble at school, and the headmaster called Ruth and said, "Hey, you need to come down here and deal with your son. He's in a lot of trouble." And Ruth just scoffed and was like, "This child has 2 parents. You need to start alternating between the 2 of us, starting right now," and just hung up on him. In 1970, Ruth became professionally involved in gender equality when she was asked to moderate a law school panel's discussion on women's liberation. And all throughout the decade, she fought hard for gender equality. And, she even took 6 cases to the Supreme Court. And, it wasn't just taking cases for women's rights to court. No. She fought for anyone. If a woman was facing discrimination, she would take the case. If a man was facing discrimination, she also would take the case. She believed in actual equality. She was the founding counsel of the ACLU's Women's Rights Project, and she even wrote a law school casebook about all of this in 1972. Also in 1972, she was offered a professor role at Columbia, and she was actually the first woman professor at Columbia to receive tenure. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter appointed Ruth to be part of the U.S. District Court of Appeals. And obviously, she jumped at the chance to do it, and the whole family just packed up from New York and moved to D.C. so she could take this opportunity. It was here that Ruth ended up getting a reputation of being a pragmatic liberal, but she also had a very keen sense of detail. Ruth was not a fan of Roe v. Wade, which was the 1973 Supreme Court case which guaranteed women the right for an abortion. Now, it wasn't why you think she wasn't a fan of it. So she was giving a lecture in 1992 in New York when she explained her reasoning behind this. She thinks that they tried to do too much too fast and it opened it up for fierce attacks later on in the future. It shouldn't have been based on a woman's right to privacy. It should have been based on not having any kind of restrictions that were gender-based. In 1993, Justice Byron White retired from the Supreme Court, and that left a seat open for President Bill Clinton to fill. He wanted someone with the intellect and the political skills necessary to deal with the conservatives that were already serving on the bench. Ruth was just the perfect candidate for him. And when her name came up for nomination, Marty was in the forefront for her campaign, always fighting in her corner. Ruth was even known to say that if it wasn't for Marty, she probably wouldn't have won. Her confirmation hearings were really quick and actually uncontroversial. Like, the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously supported her, and then when it went to the entire Senate, she was confirmed 96-3. She was officially sworn in on August 10th, 1933, and was the second woman ever to be appointed onto the Supreme Court. To date, there are still only 4 women to ever earn this title. In a 1993 White House press conference that was talking about her nomination, she gave a very emotional speech and said this at the end of it.
I have a last thank you. It is to my mother, Celia Amster Bader, the bravest and strongest person I have known, who was taken from me much too soon. I pray that I may be all that she would have been had she lived in an age when women could aspire and achieve, and daughters are cherished as much as sons.
While in the Supreme Court, Ruth kept being an advocate for equal gender rights. Like in 1996, she heard the case of the U.S. v. Virginia, which the Virginia Military Institute had this long-standing tradition of only male enrollment, and their argument was that it was unsuitable for women. Ruth was not having any of that, and she wrote the majority opinion, which ultimately ruled that they needed to start accepting women. But here's a little bit of an excerpt from that. Generalizations about the way women are, estimates of what is appropriate for most women, no longer justify denying opportunity to women whose talent and capacity place them outside the average description. While yes, Ruth was a liberal judge, that didn't mean she didn't get along with the conservatives that were also on the court. Like, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman to ever be appointed to the Supreme Court, and her and Ruth were really good friends. She happened to be a conservative. She bonded really well with Justice Antoine Scalia about their mutual love for opera. He was also conservative. First Chief Justice she ever served under was Justice William Rehnquist, and she had nothing but high regards for him. And again, he was a conservative. But that's not to say there weren't exceptions to this. Like, she had a lot less in common with the conservative judges that were appointed by the later Republican presidents George W. Bush and Donald Trump. In September of 1999, she was hospitalized for an abdominal infection. But once they got in there, they realized that she had a tumor on her colon. So they went ahead and did surgery. She even worked while she was in the hospital and never even missed a day of work. And then after her surgery and after getting over her cancer, she realized she wasn't feeling very strong. So she started going to a personal trainer with the Supreme Court. And the woman was 5'1" and barely weighed about 100 pounds during most of her adult life, and she could outlift a lot of the male justices. This was just her first round of cancer. In 2000, the presidential candidates were George W. Bush and Al Gore, and there was this huge thing with Florida where they kept having to recount the ballots, and the Florida Supreme Court wanted them to go back and count the ballots manually. But the Bush campaign didn't want them to do that, so they took their case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And ultimately, they sided with the campaign. And so this ultimately allowed Bush to win Florida, which then let him win the presidency. Ruth didn't agree with siding with the campaign, and in a snarky way, she just wrote, "I dissent," which is apparently not very nice in legal terms. But this phrase became something very associated with her later on in her life. In January of 2009, Ruth was going in just for a regular medical checkup when they found a tumor on her pancreas. So they went ahead and did surgery, and they removed part of her pancreas, and they removed her spleen as well. And just 2 weeks, she was out of the hospital and back on the bench. But again, she didn't miss a day of work. Justice David Souter retired in 2009, and Justice Paul Stevens retired in 2010, which ended up making Ruth the oldest liberal judge that was serving. Marty always was in Ruth's corner, like I said. And at one point, he even said to a friend that the greatest accomplishment he ever did was to allow Ruth to make her accomplishments.
I found this letter in the drawer next to Marty's bed in the hospital. And it reads, "My dearest Ruth, you are the only person I have loved in my life, setting aside a bit parents and kids and their kids. And I have admired and loved you almost since the day we first met at Cornell, some 56 years ago. It was wrong about 56, it was nearly 60 years. What a treat it has been to watch you progress to the very top of the legal world. I will be in Johns Hopkins Medical Center until Friday, June 25th, I believe. And between then and now, I shall think hard on my remaining health and life, and consider on balance the time has come for me to toughen out or to take leave of life, because the loss of quality now simply overwhelms. I hope you will support where I come out, but I understand you may not. I will not love you a jot less."
In 2010, after 56 years of marriage, Marty passed away from testicular cancer. The day after he passed, Ruth was already back at work because she said that's what Marty would have wanted her to do. In 2011, President Obama singled Ruth out and during a White House ceremony and said that he was very fond of her and that she was one of his favorite people. But given her age, a lot of people were starting to think that she needed to retire so that Obama could replace her with a younger liberal judge. But Ruth basically said that she's going to keep doing her job until she could not do it anymore, and she refused to retire. Obergefell v. Hodges was the 2015 landmark case that guaranteed same-sex couples the right to get married in every state. And Ruth had been an officiant for same-sex couple marriages in the past, and she was a huge proponent of LGBTQ+ rights. She even called out the attitudes of the lawyers who were fighting against it, and as well as some of the other justices who were trying to say you can't just change marital tradition. Marriage was a relationship of a dominant male and to a subordinate female. That ended as the result of this court's decision in 1982 when Louisiana's head and master rule was struck down. Would that be a choice of states should still be allowed to have, to cling to marriage the way it once was? A lot of people also try to push the point of marriage is only to have children. And so obviously same-sex couples can't naturally give birth to a child. Like they can do surrogacy, adoption, whatever, but they themselves can't have a kid. And so Ruth clapped back again and she was like, okay, so let's say there's a heterosexual couple in their 70s and they want to get married. They can't have kids. Are they allowed to get married? What's the difference? During a workout in November 2014, Ruth suddenly had horrible chest pains, so they rushed her to the hospital where she had to have a stent put in her coronary artery. At this point, she was 81 years old. And around the time of the 2016 elections, Ruth called Trump out for being a faker and that he had gotten away with not releasing his tax returns. She later regretted making these comments, and he tried to say that she needed to recuse herself for any court case that involved him. She didn't. Trump put out a list in January of 2018 of judges he would want to recommend for the Supreme Court because a lot of the justices were getting older. And Ruth was, in her 80s by this point, but she wanted to make it a point that she wasn't going anywhere. So she fully stacked her law clerks until 2020. In November 2018, the Supreme Court released a document saying that Ruth had fallen in her chambers and she had broken 3 ribs. She was okay, but she was uncomfortable. She went back to the doctor a couple weeks later and they found some cancer in her lungs. It hadn't metastasized yet, luckily, so she just underwent surgery so they could cut all the cancer out. And true to form, Ruth ruled on the asylum case from her hospital bed. Less than a year later, in August of 2019, doctors found another tumor on her pancreas. This was the second time she had cancer within a year, and the second time she had gone through pancreatic cancer. And she did surgery and went through chemotherapy. And she was even quoted as to saying that she felt better when she was active rather than just wallowing and feeling sad for herself. But in January of 2020, she announced that she was officially cancer-free. In May of 2020, she had gallstones that went up the cystic ducts and completely blocked her gallbladder, which resulted in infection, which made her have to be hospitalized. Then in July of 2020, doctors found another tumor on her pancreas, but unfortunately this time it had already metastasized to her liver. And Ruth fought as hard as she could against this. In September of 2020, she told her granddaughter Clara that it was her fervent wish not to be replaced until after the election. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died September 18, 2020, in her Washington, D.C. home as a result of complications from her cancer. Vice President Joe Biden said that she was a giant in the legal profession and a beloved figure. Trump even complimented her and said she was an amazing woman who led an amazing life, whether or not you actually liked her. At her memorial service, Rabbi Holzblatt told of a piece of artwork she had hanging in her chambers that was a scripture from the Torah, and it said, Tzedek, Tzedek, Turdolf, which means justice, justice, you must pursue. And this was how Ruth lived her life. Thank you guys for watching my video. I really appreciate you for making it this far. Make sure you go ahead and hit that like button down below. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button while you're down there. And don't forget also to let me know down in the comments below how Ruth impacted your life or how she inspired you in some way. And I will see you guys in the next video.